The problem with those homes is that they aren't solving architectural problems. They sell architecture, in quotes, as the skin of the building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is typically what people think of when they think of architectures. They think of style, and
Right.
not necessarily how to live with less or functional
Yeah.
solutions to the problems that we have just living. It's just a checklist of it has this many rooms, there are this many square feet,
Right.
and
Yeah,
it solves those problems.
we could deconstruct a little bit about what's wrong with all that. You're hitting on one of the things, like the house is driven by a feature list. Does it have a
Right.
tray ceiling? Does it have a garden tub? Does it have all of these like terms? Like one of the things I fight with in my practice is sort of undoing these marketing terms that people have sort of taken in, and it internalizes. This is what houses are about, isn't it?
Welcome to the Archispeak podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. Each episode, Neil Pan, Cormac Phelan, and I have a casual conversation about all things architecture, and we invite you to listen in as we talk about everything in the profession, both the good and the bad. Maybe you're considering a career in architecture, you're still in school, or you've been around the blocks of Corbusier's City of Tomorrow more times than you'd like to admit. Join us in the studio as we stand around the water cooler and talk about why we love our chosen profession. It's time for some Archispeak.
I died in South Africa. Oh, they outlined my body in Tiffany's blue. When I died, I drove right in and swam with the dolphins and Lisa Frank. And you.
Welcome to episode 66 of the Archispeak podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
And first up, this episode of Archispeak is sponsored by ARCAT. Visit them at arcat.com. We're also sponsored by Architect Exam Prep. Help yourself pass the ARE by visiting our Pass the Architect's Registration Exam page at archispeakpodcast.com/ARE and use the link there to purchase your study guides. So this week, we actually have a guest. Everybody say welcome to Greg La Vardera.
Welcome.
Put in some fanfare there.
Wow, thanks.
Yeah.
Hi. Welcome, Greg, to the show.
Thank you. Wow, this is exciting because I'm a longtime listener from when you guys started, and this is really, really exciting to be here.
It's exciting for us too, and we thank you for all of your support in the past, for sure, of the podcast, and your commenting on the site. That's a huge help to us as well. I think just keeping the conversation going after the show and putting your experience out there has been something that a lot of people have appreciated, not only us, but definitely appreciated on our end of it.
It's great.
Well, one of the reasons we wanted to have Greg on the show is believe it was last year, and if I had done my homework properly, I'd know which episode number that was. But we did an episode where we poked a little fun or had a little conversation about the Hanley Wood video, where they were kind of bashing the AIA and architects in general a little bit and selling plans and online, and that's something that Greg does. And so we wanted to have Greg on to talk a little bit about the whole concept of selling plans online, and kind of also too, I'd like to revisit that perspective of what we thought of that Hanley Wood video, and to really kind of get into the whole question about selling plans online, and then from Greg's perspective, get his experience of what it's like to do so, and what are the benefits and pitfalls that he's found over the time he's been doing it.
Yeah, that Hanley Wood piece. I've got a car alarm going.
Yeah, it's real life. It's okay.
That's all right.
It's done. So that Hanley Wood piece was, that irked me as much as anybody else, simply because Hanley Wood is the sort of the anointed publisher of the magazine that the AIA includes with your membership. And the AIA has special sections in that magazine where they can communicate directly to their members. So, at one level, here's this partnership with Hanley Wood and the AIA. And then at the other level, Hanley Wood has an enormous house plan business.
Exactly.
And part of their marketing for that house plan business is they were saying, don't go out and hire an architect, buy house plans from us. And that,
Yep.
the conflict of interest there is just so raw. But to give them a little bit of credit, they're broken into divisions, and the person who's running their marketing for house plans is not talking to the person that's in charge of their relationship with the AIA. But not to apologize for them, because that in general bothers me a tremendous amount. I don't think that Hanley Wood was the ideal choice to be the AIA partner, not just because of the house plans. I mean, they publish magazines for builders and developers and a whole host of other people in the construction industry. And I find it really difficult to believe that they can earnestly serve all of those interests without conflict.
Yeah, but the question is how well are they serving any of them? But that's a different conversation.
I think they're serving many of the others very well.
Yeah, I would also interject that if you can't, if we see that from our position, them not serving the architects as well with that other video, but there's probably some of the exact same thing happening the other way around.
Perhaps.
So yeah, perhaps. So yeah, I agree. It's not a ideal partnership when they have to serve so many conflicting industries. I mean, they're not really conflicting, but they're also fighting for some similar territory.
And especially with the, sorry, I was just going to say, especially with that specific issue that we brought up back then with the video, not only do they have, I mean, here's a company who's making, as Greg said, quite a bit of money off of their house plan division, and they're basically going out and telling everybody, buy our house plans. You don't need an architect. Oh, by the way, we also represent architects in some form of capacity. And it's just like, this isn't quite sitting well with all of us architects. And it just kind of, you're right, it kind of irked everybody.
Yeah. Well, the other side of it is it was a negative way for them to promote house plans. I think in reality, there's not a tremendous amount of overlap between the kind of customer that's going to buy a house plan and the kind of customer that's going to hire an architect to design a custom house. There's such a disparity in the level of commitment and the expense in those two options. You're really not. It's like the difference between selling somebody a motorcycle and selling somebody an automobile.
Mm-hmm.
So in reality, there's really not that conflict in the marketplace, but what they were doing was sort of denigrating architects and what we do in order to make what they're trying to sell seem more appealing. That was really what the problem was there. So, to me, part of the solution for that is for architects to become more active and go in and own more of the house plan business.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Well, and I think that a lot of architects, like myself, who, I grew up basically in the 80s. This is how I got first interested in this. I used to go to the magazine aisle, and I wasn't looking at the BMX magazines or the whatever there else was, skateboarding magazines. Even though I did get into that later on, but my first kind of exposure was finding house plans in Sunset and finding house plan books, or magazines, and just tracing over them or trying to draw them myself. And that was really something that interested me as a kid. And so I think that we all kind of, at least in my age group, kind of think back fondly upon the whole, you can buy a magazine full of plans. Like that was basically porno for me as a kid.
This is something really unique to the American housing market. In Europe, you don't find house plans for sale like that. There are house manufacturers that publish catalogs,
right?
But not plans that you would buy and then go out and find somebody to build for you. So there is a unique market situation in the United States. But here's the thing. I mean, as architects, we often, like to complain about the poor state of design in the housing industry. The houses that are designed and built and sold, for the most part, we don't think the design is very good. It's drifted away from the authenticity of historic styles, and it's sort of its own thing right now. I don't even know how to describe it or what to call it, but we all know it's not architecture.
Right.
So, we want to influence that and change it in some way. And, house plans happens to be something that the marketplace understands really well. Any person you talk to understands that you can go out and buy a house plan somewhere and build a house that way. The consumer really doesn't. I mean, they know you might be able to hire an architect, but they really don't understand much about that process. And it's usually, if you've ever had a new client, it's always very new to them.
I was going to, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I mean,
Go right ahead.
what is the, what is their first perception? Either an architect's difficult to work with, I don't know how to work with an architect, or they're really expensive. And people who are looking to buy house plans typically aren't looking to spend a lot of money.
Correct.
And so that's why when, I was listening to you talk about the design and how we kind of need to retake the lead in that, and you're doing a great job of that, is, we're, a lot of architects look down at people who are making, other architects who are doing house plans and catalogs and things like that are like, ugh, you're just catering to kind of like the lower common denominator type thing, and missing the whole big picture that you just illustrated is we lost control of residential design on the numerous economic scales of things. Yeah, people are going to go and they're going to buy the expensive house. They're going to get an architect to design the most expensive houses. But what about the blue collar worker? I mean, one of the reasons why I got into architecture growing up as a kid who parents came through, grandparents, parents were all worked for, they were auto workers. So they couldn't afford architects, but I wanted to be able to be somebody an architect who was accessible to people who couldn't afford an architect.
Right.
And that, go ahead.
I was going to say that those houses that people are left with to have a choice to buy, I mean, they've sort of drifted away from, the traditions and the precedents of houses that we see, that are historic houses. I mean, It even doesn't go back that far. You go back to, before World War II, the housing stock was, very well designed and, sort of very authentic in its stylings, or, very creative in its, the way it appropriated historic styles and reused them. And it, starting like in the 50s, what broke from that was sort of the mid-century movement in the United States. But that sort of, had its place and then sort of, let's say failed, but sort of ended.
Right.
And then we ended up with, we had broken all the rules now, and sort of all the old ways were open to not following them anymore. So what emerged from that was this sort of its own thing, like housing, which wasn't, any of the architectural threads that we had all, through history before that. And it's sort of gone off in its own direction. And it's being dictated by other forces than design. It's being dictated by the economics of building, the expediency of getting materials. It's really being dictated by the lowest common denominator in many ways to make building easy for the builders and easy for the sellers. Where there's nothing distinctive about any of the houses. A real estate agent can sell you any house because more or less they're all alike.
Right.
There's regional styles. If you're buying a house in the South, it's probably going to be a slab on grade. If it's in the Northeast, it's probably going to have a basement. Out West, there's a sort of this little Spanish tradition. So there's styles that reflect that. But the architecture is sort of gone from the housing industry, the largest part. And
really,
those houses.
All that
those houses are being designed by architects. They're just working for builders, or they are, if they are working for themselves, they're completely at the whim of the builders that want these things that are, congruous with the market.
Right.
Yeah, I think what sets architecture apart from that kind of stuff is solving problems for individuals, right? So if you're buying a tract home, you're just trying to find something that fits your life as good as you can. It's like buying a Toyota Camry. It's made for any man versus made to fit like a glove for you in particular. It seems like what you're doing, Greg, with Lamy Design is it's a kind of in the middle of those two things. It's architecture. It's way more architecture for not as big of a market, right? It's still not as big of a market, but it's a lot more architectural. And I think the other thing about what you were talking about with the regionalism is that the problem with those homes is that they aren't solving architectural problems. They sell architecture, in quotes, as the skin of the building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is typically what people think of when they think of architectures. They think of style and not necessarily how to live with less or functional solutions to the problems that we have just living. It's just a checklist of it has this many rooms, there are this many square feet, and it solves those problems.
We could deconstruct a little bit about what's wrong with all that. You're hitting on one of the things, like the house is driven by a feature list. Does it have a tray ceiling? Does it have a garden tub? Does it have all of these like terms? Like one of the things I fight with in my practice is sort of undoing these marketing terms that people have sort of taken in, and it internalizes. This is what houses are about, isn't it? A garden tub and a tray ceiling in the master bedroom. Like I don't even know what those things are.
On top of that, I think the Home Depot, just by having materials on display for everybody instead of lumber yards that just used to be for contractors, right? Now we have Home Depot where granite countertops is like one of the selling points, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so the surface material of a countertop is now a major selling point in a piece of architecture, again, in quotes.
What's the first thing a realtor says? And it has granite countertops.
Yeah. And, home and garden television and all of that sort of shelter television has, it's been a boon at one point, has made people more interested, but at the same time has, reinforced a lot of these, horrible notions. You look at the floor plans, you use a 45-degree angle to make a floor plan more interesting, but there is no insight as to what that means in 3D space, and that comes across in all the marketing, because any mainstream house plan vendor sells a house plan on a floor plan and a pretty sketch of the front of the house, and there's no effort to communicate what the interior of the house is, and there's no concern about what the other three sides of the house look like, because it doesn't matter, and nobody's thought about it. And
the other three sides don't have curb appeal, right?
Yeah, but it's got granite countertops and 3 bedrooms, 2 baths.
Right.
Well, the detriment also, I think, that I see in the creep of this is that because builders are building commercial projects that I work on that have also done residential, so on one side they're adding in 45-degree angles into the walls, and they're adding in coves and all these things. But then when it comes to a commercial project like I'm working on, or a public project, as soon as you do something like that for a real reason, mind you, it's like, why are you doing that? That's too expensive.
Yeah.
And so it's biting us because they don't want to build anything that is too hard to build, right? But you see these types of things all day long as bells and whistles on top of house plans to sell more of those.
Well, and architects, we're guilty of this in some level too, because when you do have a client for a custom house and, it has a budget that allows you to do nice things, we end up very often falling back on materiality, like what makes this house impressive or custom ends up being, the really nice siding material that's used, or exotic siding material, or, the beautiful materials that go into the custom fittings on the inside, and in some ways that's like a symptom of the same kind of, psychosis as as this mainstream.
I think that's what's so appealing about like the old Neutra houses and the Schindler houses and stuff. They were built out of extremely simple materials. They didn't rely on that. I mean, it was plaster and sticks, but they were really able to work with form and light and space to create these amazing places to live. And I don't think they're appreciated by most people, but to somebody like me, they were able to pull off, they were able to get away with some pretty amazing stuff with really cheap materials. And I think there's a huge lesson for architects there. It speaks directly to what you were just saying.
Yeah.
Right. And let's let that take us back to the initial question that you posed, is like, what is this middle ground where we can enter this marketplace? Architects can be very good at, leveraging the quality of the space and the design that doesn't necessarily have to rely on the materiality. That's where we can deliver value to the plan customer that these other designers that don't really know how to design or don't really know architecture. I mean, yes, some plans are being designed by architects. Many of them are, but there's also many other plan designers that don't have a formal architectural education, and a lot of them are responsible for many of the banal house designs you see in plan catalogs. So how do we do that? Ultimately, again, I just want to qualify that doing house plans is one way to try to address the housing market. I am eager to see another architect come up with a different business strategy, a different business model to, influence the market and change it. But when I came to it, house plans seemed like an obvious way, to try to influence the market because, again, it was a well-understood vehicle for delivering house designs to consumers. So what do we do? I mean, and what I chose to do is to focus on a niche and an interest point where people might be willing to depart from standard houses, the standard way to buy a house and acquire a house, to build something that they were really interested in. And so for me, it centered around modern design. Modern houses are not something that's readily available. If you go out to a real estate agent or a developer. Now I know the West Coast is a little bit different.
Yeah.
There's a lot of mid-century building. Los Angeles, San Diego. Those places have a enviable modern house market. But in the East Coast, there are little pockets of mid-century modernism. And now as that's sort of become popular, those houses have enjoyed, a lot of building of value. But some people want a new house. They don't want to buy an old house. They don't want to deal with the wiring. They don't want to deal with the repairs. And, so there is a marketplace for people who want to build a new house, who are interested in modern houses. It may be somebody that subscribes to Dwell or Metropolitan Home, or or watches Home and Garden TV to see modern houses. And so that was sort of the niche market that I decided to go after. Now there's lots of other niches that can be defined and pursued that way. There's people that are extremely interested in historic neighborhoods, colonial houses, Victorian houses, craftsman houses. You can look at go to the bookstore and look at the magazine rack, and you'll see titles addressing these niche interests, whether it's American Bungalow magazine or Victorian Home magazine. So there's all these other niches out there where you can find people that will be interested in houses that address that special interest. And these are things that the houseplant industry really aren't addressing. So this is an architect's opportunity, because we're very facile at designing, things that are very authentic and can respond to these interests. And the houseplant industry, either that's too small a focus for them, or they don't really have the talent to do that. So we can introduce better quality design into these niches and find a market and a following there. and things that we can develop through, the internet and the use of social media, all the things that, you guys have talked before about with promoting your practice.
I think that there's other opportunities too out there for architects. So there's this kind of fundamental baseline that we should establish, which is people are, and we've talked about this, but people are way more comfortable buying something than buying a process, because the process is very unknown, right? So if they're buying a physical thing, they do that all the time, right? And people make large purchases and they make small purchases, but they do it all the time. And it's the known. And because of that, typically the relationship is established between consumer and provider during the pre-buy process. But then as soon as they buy the thing, the relationship ends, right? Unless there's some kind of warranty period or something like that, which and then it's only on an as-needed basis. I think architects could be a lot more proactive in the time period after the thing is bought. So if it's house plans, or if it were whatever it is, if it's an actual spec home that's been designed and built, I think that there's a huge market because of our expertise and how these things age and how you have to take care of them. Every homeowner knows that it kind of sucks to own a home, right? Because you have to fix the thing when it breaks. The water heater goes out, you have to fix it right then. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in there for architects to design a life cycle for these products that either you sell on your site, Greg, or that some other architect could come up with to help homeowners with that process. So maybe they buy a smaller house and they want to add on in the future. Maybe that's something that they would actually want to go back to that architect to do, because they would be the ones who know that thing so intimately.
Frank did it.
Same with maintenance. Same with all of this stuff that just comes along with home ownership that is normally just completely left up to the owner and their trip to Home Depot or whatever.
Look, I think that's a completely legitimate, way to, distinguish an offering and offer more value to the consumer. I mean, it's not only about different architectural styles. I mean, you're talking about, offering an ongoing relationship, becoming a resource for the homeowner over their time owning the house. Yeah. And that's a tremendous value statement to make, to somebody that's going to buy a set of houseplants to you. So
I think it also just gives a ton of peace of mind to the person who's buying it to know that there's that thing to fall back onto.
Yeah, yes, you're going to build a house from this, and I'm going to, be there standing behind the way it's going to perform for you, over time. You're going to have resources if you have questions later on. I mean, this is the kind of creativity that I think needs to be applied to the housing market. It's not just superficially the styles of the house. And I think, we have to be creative about how we make those propositions. And, this is the way that we can start to take more control of the houseplant market.
It's also going to take some guts. I think a lot of architects are so shy because of the liability of certain aspects of what we do that, that's the last thing somebody wants to do is maintain a relationship where they're responsible for the performance of a home. But I really think that that's what is going to start to create a place for architects to operate in which nobody does that right now, right? If anybody does that, it's warranty services or some kind of a policy where, again, it's just on an as-needed basis. But if we were a lot more proactive in that space, I think that that would just bring a lot of peace of mind. But it would also open us up to having to stand by our word and by our designs, so that we can support them well into the future, because these homes last, right? And so, or they should. A lot of them don't, and that's a big problem. And that's why people don't want to buy older homes. I mean, I'm in a home built in 1947, and the plumbing is a nightmare. So, if I can buy a home where when I have a question, there's a way for me to get an answer and to get the right answer quickly.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you're creating a warranty service as much as, just a, the sense that you always have the designer there as a, resource and reference.
I kind of think of it as like the Genius Bar in an Apple store, right? Where you can just go in and you can get service, and they're going to help you out as much as they can for free. And if something costs, it costs, but they're not trying to get you to spend more money. They're just trying to make sure that you're happy with what you've got.
Satisfaction of your purchase.
Yeah.
Now, it's hard to come in and say that, you're going to stand behind the work in a certain way. I mean, when you sell house plans, some of those customers disappear and you never speak to them again. And then, at least for me, and then others I'm able to, create a relationship with and watch them build their house, give them advice along the way. But it's not like a custom commission. You have very little, I shouldn't even say very little. You have no control over the contractor. You have no, influence over the outcome of the building of that house, except what the owner might invite you to give feedback or input or have a question. So it's really it plays out much differently than, the way a custom commission does. I mean, a lot of what you were describing would actually be a great service that you could offer on top of a custom commission.
Yeah.
But the way that might happen on a house plan is different. I mean, if you were partnering with a manufacturer, a modular builder, or if housing in America ever moves more to an industrial model, then there might be opportunity to have partnerships with fabricators, and then you could have that, because then you would have tremendous amount of assurance and control over the product that was being delivered. But I mean, this is one aspect of of selling house plans. I mean, to move away from the discussion of the market in general to the dynamic of selling house plans, it's very contrary to what architects are used to. I mean, we are used to micromanaging and specifying every last little bit that goes into a building. With house plans, you can't do that. I mean, if you are super specific in a house plan, it's actually a liability. Yeah. Every customer has a different budget. And, if the only way that house is going to turn out and look nice is if they're, using, charcoal seared cedar siding, done in the Japanese style, if that's the real hook that makes this a good house, then, chances are that's not going to play out like that with many customers. And
so the trick is to design something that, like, again, back to the Neutra example, that works regardless of like level of finish or materiality from an architectural standpoint.
Right. So you got to figure, if that house is built with vinyl siding and vinyl windows, is it still going to look good?
Yeah, and the only way to do that is not to manage it, but to actually design it really well. I mean, it does fall back on design completely at that point.
Exactly, because in this case now, you're designing a product, right? Yeah. And the product is a design, it's not a house. And that's sort of interesting. Like a subtle difference.
Yep.
So you have to have a house that when you're deciding what the windows are like, you're not looking at one manufacturer and leveraging the best strengths of that window manufacturer's product to do something great with the windows. You're looking at the window industry in general, saying, I need to do something that you would be able to successfully create with almost any window manufacturer.
Yeah, it's like a prescriptive spec.
Right.
Yeah.
And a very general one, because some window frames, if you're talking about vinyl, some are stronger than others. Some can't do really large frames. So you have to think about the constraints, because you don't know what products are going to be incorporated into the build.
You're more saying things like you could have a variety of different windows that you plug into this hole, but what I'm saying is this hole, to look good in this building, needs to be X dimension by X dimension and laid out in this fashion so that it's got the rhyme, the rhythm, and everything else. But what you put in there isn't necessarily the end goal. It's the assemblage of how it works, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, what's the house going to be clad with? Is it going to be wood siding? Is it going to be cement siding? So you have to if the look, the appearance, at least the way you represent it, has to be
kind of universal.
Distilled enough that you can achieve that with a number of different materials. So that said, once the plan goes out to somebody, they're going to do, something that you never expected. And, so our whole sort of DNA is like to, control the outcome. And this is like a different state of mind when you're doing house plans, because you send those set of prints off and you don't know what the outcome is going to be like, whether you're even going to like it. And you have to be okay with that. You have to sort of let go.
Right.
And,
this is another analogy to take it back to Apple again. I know, sorry, but when they first designed the iPhone, I mean, there were no third-party applications or developers for it, right? So they put this thing out there and said, "Here it is," and then everybody kind of clamored for the ability to create applications for it, because they basically said, and maybe I'm confusing the iPad and the iPhone launch, but it was like, here's this thing. We don't know what you're going to use it for to some level. Like, obviously, it has some basic functions that they were trying to position it to solve. But once developers got a hold of it, once a builder gets a hold of your plans or a client gets a hold of your plans, they are going to use it in ways you never thought of. And some of those things could be amazing, and some of them can be really bad. I mean, we've seen applications that are terrible, and we've seen some that change our lives. So I think it's a similar analogy in the way that we do have to be okay with that. We have to provide a framework for them to make it theirs.
Right. So you have to have a design. So now this is where we get down to, the challenge of this. Architects like to dismiss house plans. They say that's not architecture. With architecture, you have a client and they have needs, and we're designing to meet them, and there's a site, and the house has to, be designed to respond to that site. And that's what architecture is. A house plan is not that. And rather than arguing that point, I say, you're right. It's not that. It's not architecture. It's product design. Mm-hmm. And the thing that you have to realize is that is a very compelling design challenge. Every bit as challenging as trying to, meet and be exceptional at meeting a specific client's needs. Because now you're trying to design something that has an inherent flexibility, that can meet the needs of a diverse group of customers, and that can be successfully built at a range of budgets with a range of quality materials, and still come out with a house that people feel, is the product that they bought off of your site. So that's a really compelling design challenge, and not something that I think you can, denigrate and say, oh, that's not architecture. No, it's not. It's not architecture in that traditional sense, but it's a extremely challenging and I can say at this point rewarding, endeavor to try to come up with a house design that works that way. So,
I would also, I would say it's not capital A architecture, but we also have to get over the point that who would we rather have doing this? I mean, architects are the people who should be doing that, and they can solve those problems better than anybody else. So why denigrate it at all because what's the alternative? The alternative is less architects doing that work, and that's not a good thing. We want more architects doing that kind of work.
And that's where we are. I mean, we are living that alternative.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, and so that's why I've always said this is something that we should be doing. We should be, owning this market. Right. That's not something that would ever happen overnight. But as people, see more interesting houses, that influences other people in the market. So they're not going to be, perhaps not as influenced by a really expensive custom house that they don't think they'd ever afford. But if their neighbor builds a really interesting looking house, they did it, from a house plan, and they did it at a budget similar, to my own house, then it's like, well, why can't my house be interesting like that? And that's how it spreads from customer to customer, and we start to influence the market.
Think about this. I mean, right now, people love the bungalow style house, and they're like, I want this, or I want a craftsman style house. I mean, how did those become so prevalent in the American architectural legacy? They were all house plans. You could order them out of a catalog.
Pattern books.
Pattern books. I mean, I've got
tremendous tradition of that.
Yeah, I've got a great book on the Sears Craftsman houses. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, and now people
can't get more catalog than that.
Exactly. But I mean, they became such a integral part of, like, everybody is so nostalgic for these houses, and there's, oh, I live in a craftsman house. I'm like, oh, you mean a house that was bought out of a catalog that hundreds of other people own too, which is okay. But
so to talk a little bit about how this plays out, the most popular house for my catalog has been probably 75% of the houses built for my catalog has been this one particular house design called the Platt House. I have a version, it's a 2-bedroom, like a weekend cabin, and a 3-bedroom version. And this house has been built over a dozen times. Now, when have you ever designed something that's been built a dozen times?
That's pretty cool.
That's an extremely compelling, situation where you can see how this house plays out in different people's hands, how they alter it to suit their site, how they alter it to suit their taste. And that's like the most exciting thing to me. Like, you would think, okay, I mean, I'd love to see the other house designs get built, but every time this house gets built again, it is like, wow, what's it going to be like this time, Yeah. And so that's like a really interesting, situation. And I can't see how any architect that is interested in design wouldn't be fascinated and challenged and rewarded by, working in that manner. So I think, there's a really, great opportunity here. And also, when done well and when house plans are selling, this can be, a very profitable, adjunct to your practice. Mm-hmm. I have developed a lot more than I have sold. So, I can't say that I'm, even, in the black on my efforts here, but I do know when house plans are selling and they have that additional income from it, it is a great thing for your practice to be able to have that happening. So
let's take a minute out of the show to thank our first sponsor. Would you like someone to draw CAD details for you, create BIM objects for you, write specifications for you? Would you like someone to do it for free? ARCAT has already done all of this for you. Search the ARCAT libraries online for these products and more free of charge, and no registration is required to download their content. ARCAT has created a website devoted to you, the building professional, to find building product information fast and hassle-free. Check out ARCAT today at arcat.com. That is ARCAT.com. Thanks, ARCAT, for sponsoring the Archispeak podcast. One of the most interesting things about this whole endeavor that you have, Greg, to me, is that it's built up. You've built up this catalog that enables passive income to happen, which most architects don't have. Yeah. And usually selling time for money is a losing proposition because of, and maybe it is too with what you're doing, because you are, like you said, you're in the red as far as effort versus payback. But I think that that ability to wake up in the morning and see that you've sold 1 or 2 sets of house plans overnight to somebody anywhere in the world is something that most architects would love, but haven't even considered that idea.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just have to qualify that, right now, we've just come through, a recession. And I have to say, during that recession, not much sold at all. Nobody, we're talking about, look, this isn't people that are going out to buy a house with a realtor. This aren't people that are going out to buy a house from a builder. This is a much smaller percentage of the housing market. Somebody that is going to go to the trouble to say, I want to build just this kind of house, and so I'm going to go buy a plan and build it myself. So you're talking about a small number out of the housing industry, and people that have a lot of money can hire an architect to do a custom house. They may be building houses, and the recession may be long over for them. But I do not see the confidence has returned to this segment of the market yet. People may be buying houses, but there are not people like really sticking their neck out, to build a custom house with a set of house plans that they bought. So I think this segment of the housing market still hasn't recovered yet. So, but, that said, when house plans were selling regularly, that allowed me to, take time from, normal practice routine to invest in expanding my catalog. And as well, it allowed me to be more particular and selective on the commissions that I did accept, because I could, you sort of have a sense when you're writing a proposal if this is going to be a difficult project or a profitable project. And if you are in a position where you can screen out projects that perhaps aren't as profitable that you otherwise would take simply to, fill your time and to keep cash flow moving, if you now have the ability to have more discretion about those, it makes the rest of your practice more profitable as well.
So, Greg, I wanted to ask you about the process. What if, in your experience, a client or a customer, really, I guess, has bought a set of plans? What happens on their side? Do they hire? Is there a contractor that finishes off the plans, gets their permits? What, in your experience, have you found?
Well, we're used to working in areas that are heavily regulated, and we have a building permit application, and the plans are reviewed. In places like that, the customer has to adapt the foundations and adapt, the strength of the roof framing to suit local conditions. There's certain things that always have to be specific to where you are. Foundation design is one of them. Frost depth is different in different places. Some places have seismic concerns. Above ground, we have, snow load, which dictates the size of roof framing. We also have wind concerns, again, lateral bracing. So in different places in the country, you need, different treatments. So the plans have to be adapted. Now, that said, most customers tend to be someplace where there's very little oversight, and in many cases, there's not even building permits. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't need to adapt the plans. They still need to do that, but very often this will be done by the builder simply by building according to practices that they're accustomed to building in their region. So in that case, the builder is simply adapting to what they're used to doing. And the framing size, they have to, if there's a structural engineer they've worked with before, or, simply going to the manufacturer of engineered framing so that they can get the proper size for roof framing members. So now what does that say about, what do we do as far as preparing the plans? Well, what I do is I prepare the plans with foundation designs and framing sizing, all proper for my region. So if I have a customer that comes to me and says, I want to build one of your houses here, I don't have to do anything to adapt the plans because they're ready for my region. And that's really something I do just for, my own convenience. Now, where I am, I'm outside of Philadelphia, so we have a winter climate, and, the design of our walls is particular for heating seasons. We also have a pretty good summers, so, we have concerns about summer conditions as well. We have snow, so we have snow load. Not a high amount like you have, going north. So my region happens to be a good median, and adapting a design that works here to go further north or to go further south is not such a radical change. So that just happens to be, happenstance for me because, the factors that feed into, designing in my region are a good median. But I design it that way just simply for the convenience of myself and for selling to customers in my region, that they don't have to be adapted.
Does that happen mostly? Do you actually sell most of your plans to people in your region?
No, actually, I've sold very few to people in my region. Right now, there's one house under construction in central Pennsylvania, and that is the closest to home as any of them.
So how far-reaching does your practice go?
There's been a house in Maine. There's been a house in Hawaii.
Nice. That's very cool.
Yeah, it is.
Cool.
And
I think that's something that the internet has really allowed to happen a lot more than we're probably giving it credit to. House plans before were sold in magazines and distributed everywhere, right? But for you as a single person designing these things, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it's led to opportunities where, people have asked me to do a custom design in some far flung place where I would never, my practice never would have reached, and that's just come through, marketing the house plans, on a wide basis. So, it's been a good, influence on the rest of my practice as well. Now, when somebody has to modify the house plans for their region, now sometimes, if it is in an area that's, closely regulated with, building permits and plan examinations, very often they may ask you to help them with that. Or, very often they want to make some, change to the floor plan or the design in some way. And so that modification work also becomes a big part of the business. And again, you try to, offer those services in a way that is, profitable for you, and that provides good work as well.
So, Greg, what exactly are they buying? Do they buy a set of PDFs, or do you send them a set of prints, or do they get CAD files to modify for their region? What exactly are you selling them?
Well, I'm not totally on a par with the houseplan industry here. The houseplan industry is eager to sell you prints. They're eager to sell you CAD files and or PDF files. If you want, the prints are all marked so that you can't copy them. They have copyright notices on them which are supposed to prevent a copy shop from duplicating them. So they want to sell you the prints. If you need more prints, they want to sell them to you. I have a slightly different approach. I don't want to be the print shop for my customers, so I give them a license letter that allows them to, take it to a copy shop and reproduce them as much as they need to build their house. But at the same time, I don't sell any digital products. I don't sell PDFs, and I don't sell CAD files. And the reason why I don't do that is because, as we all know, there is no way to control those digital products once they are out. And so, if you sell a PDF, anybody could print as good a set of prints from a PDF as I can, and they would be indistinguishable from prints that I sold. So not that somebody can't take a print and scan it and make a PDF and sell it, but there will always be a degradation of quality. It will always be fairly simple to identify whether something was scanned and reprinted versus an original print. And so I don't offer digital items simply because I can't control them. And I think the rest of the industry, they don't care so much about that because the designs are so generic. There's no reason to worry about somebody taking the design. I mean, the designs are, they're completely replaceable. I mean, it's okay. Why, there's another house plan for sale on another site that's almost identical. So I think when you're doing something unique and distinctive, that the concern about copying is different. And so I haven't been able to reconcile that. The technology is just not up to preventing PDFs or CAD files from being copied and or distributed, without permission.
Okay, so when you've seen some of your designs modified, if you were not contracted to make those modifications, I assume they're just kind of making them on the fly in the field and changing them as they see fit.
Yeah,
has that been your experience?
The gamut. Now, there's the gamut. I've had customers that have hired a local architect, and he's nearly redrawn the entire set of plans to alter it. And I try to be open-minded with that. I mean, I say to that other architect, well, if you find another customer that wants to build the house as you've modified it, then I'm happy to do that with you. I'd consider it another house plan sale, and you can charge them whatever you want for your modification. So I try to turn it into an opportunity rather than trying to, put limits on that secondary designer. Builders, I don't think are thinking so much to reproduce or build it again that way. I think for them, at least for building one of my designs is sort of an unusual thing for them. If they find another customer that's interested in that house in the past, they've just pointed them at my website.
How do you market it?
Well,
by
right
coming
now,
on Archispeak.
No, I mean, our audience is architects here.
I know.
Us plant buyers, but I market it just through my website. When I started out, I purchased advertisements in a couple of magazines. Primarily, I advertised in Dwell magazine. I did that for about a year and a half. I also advertised in another magazine called Atomic Ranch, which is about mid-century modern houses, for a shorter run. I also advertised, there was another magazine that I tried out. I think it's called Modernism. And those ads were good, but I did it when I was starting up. And at that point, the advertisements consumed all the revenue I made from selling houseplants. So I did that for about, a year and a half and, watched the traffic on my website. And then I just stopped advertising at one point. I didn't find that I could link sales specifically to the advertisements. But it certainly, made for a tremendous number of inquiries and, the start of traffic on my website, which helped the position of the website and search engines and other things, which led to other people finding it. So although that was very, indirect benefit of the advertising, it was definitely helpful.
And how long did it take for you once you began to actually start to see sales? And then how long have you been doing this?
Well, God, sometimes I can't remember the dates.
I totally get it.
Yeah,
Neil can understand.
I'm going to the site history on my site and scrolling to the bottom. Okay, so I launched the site at the end of 2002. I started working on it and had the idea in 2001, started to work on, the idea of it, started to make sketches of house designs, started, the design and then the documents of my first house plan. After I had one house plan, I built the website and, decided how that would be structured, wrote all the content for that. And I had only one house plan at that point. So
all it takes, right?
So before launching and introducing the website, I designed a couple of other houses, just put up the designs of them. The construction documents weren't done. I think I probably had 3 plans published ready for sale before I started buying advertising. So that's not a lot of product, you can't sell a lot of houses to a lot of people when you only have 3 choices. But, at that point I was, working on it hard. This was something I did in my spare time every evening, so, if you go back to the history and you read your way through, I was introducing new designs, introducing, new construction plan sets, with some frequency, I was selling at a lower price at that point as an introductory. When I got up to about 6 or so house designs, I, raised my prices, and then just continued to develop them. When I started, I think the first sale was probably 2003, so a couple of years after I started. I think that house was not, wasn't actually built into 2004. And so I also began to, blog about it. The owner would send me photographs. I would publish the photographs. I would write about what was going on, describing the construction activity. I was doing that because, we're marketing to people who've never built a house before in all likelihood, and they don't know what it's like to build a house, and they don't know, what's behind the plaster and the walls of their house. So by describing construction, I was trying to make it more familiar to a potential customer so that they would be less afraid of the notion of trying to build a house because they, just read and watched in real time somebody else build their house and saw it come together. So that was part of it. So, blogging became a big part of my early marketing effort. And I still blog and, still publish everything I get back from customers, although I'm not blogging with the frequency I did at the beginning. And again, it was difficult to blog over the recession because there was not that much building going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, there still isn't, not nearly as much as there was. So from about 2004 to 2007, sales continued to grow. I was selling, 1 or 2 house plans a month. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that was actually, a great, level of sales. I also sell design prints, which are basically like schematic design drawings, not something you can build from, but describe the house in more detail than what I have published in the catalog. And so I used to sell, 3 or 4 sets of those a week. They were actually, a very, lucrative product because people would buy those. They were relatively inexpensive, $100 or $200, depending on the size of the prints. And that got them, in the customer's mind, that got them, one step closer to, building a house, perhaps, got them a closer look at the design without, committing to, the several $1,000s construction prints were sold for. And so, that was a great sort of, product. So in comparison to now, I'm selling, 2 or maybe 3 plans per year and 1 or 2 design prints per month. So the market is still, very retarded from where it was. And so the run up, the plans that were sold prior to the the fallout in the market, there was some momentum there, and customers were still building houses, through 2008 and 2009. Then there was a real dead period, although there were people who continued to buy some plans and still build houses. So we still had some activity and lots to show through the recession. And actually, even though things are sort of like perked up now, they're probably still like coasting through the downtime of the recession now, and new customers haven't really turned up yet, to pick up the activity and bring new projects into the fold, even though the economy is much better.
So, Greg, I'm curious, have you done CDs for all of your plans now, or because you said you don't sell all of them or haven't sold all of them? So have you done, or have you just kind of done the plans, and then maybe if somebody does buy one, then you'll generate the CDs for that?
I have most of them done. I'm looking at the catalog right now. I think right now I have 1 or 2 houses that construction prints aren't done for. And then I have a product for a row house, which is actually a family of products. I don't have any of those done yet, but that's a different story. That's something that's meant to be a design that's adaptable to party wall lines and different width lots. I don't want to get too distracted by that, but that was sort of a design problem that I was trying to tackle since I started this. The fact that row houses tend to be very specific because you have a hard limit on the site. The houses conjoin on the sidewall, so a house plan can't be fit onto the site if it's the wrong dimension. So I created a family of house designs as row houses that have plans that are adaptable, that they can be stretched 1 to 2 feet in either direction, which means they can be adapted to sites that are a variety of widths. So the outcome of that is there's a family of house designs in 3 widths on 2-foot increments that all can be adjusted a foot in each direction to give you a complete range from 12 feet up to like 22 feet. And so the fallout of that is like 48 different house plans. So I don't have, construction documents, and I will not create construction documents of those until there is a buyer. And then, as that family gets fit out, then it'll be, easier and faster to create the variations. But that practice of completing the construction drawings on demand for customers, something that I do. The last house plan I sold was for a design called the X House One. I had not completed the plans for that when the customer inquired, look, I think I'd like to build this house, but I know you don't have the construction prints done. When do you think they'll be done? And what I say is, well, what we do is you give me 4 to 6 weeks, so I can weave this into, the rest of the work in my practice, and give me a deposit, which is half of the house plan cost. And then I will create the house plan set. And when I'm done and ready to ship, I'll bill you for the balance. And that's what I did. Then the customer has assurance that the plans are coming, and it gives me enough time to get them completed. And it worked out great. That house is built. It's in Indiana.
So I have another, not a last question, but a big question. How did you determine your pricing? Say, like when you started, you mentioned after you got a few plans together, you then raised your prices. So I'm curious. There's probably a lot of our listeners going, "How did you figure out how to price this?
Yeah,
how would an architect price plans online?"
I started out pricing it at the upper range of what I saw, in the market, and I thought that's what I needed to do to start, because even though my product proposition was very different from conventional house plans, I was going into that market, and people, frankly, at that point, there weren't really a lot of alternatives. So, so I priced it very similar. I started out in the range of, $1,200. And when, as I said, the first year I offered them for less than that as a starting offer. But when I had, a good number of houses built by customers, and I had some momentum, I reevaluated the pricing and raised it significantly. And it was to position it somewhere between the cost of a house plan and the cost of a custom design. So there's a wide gulf there. As you know, house plans can, be $250. Expensive house plans can be, maybe up to $2,500. Custom designs. Now, if you're going to an architect, there's certainly residential designers and, house designers that sell custom designs very cheaply. But if you want, something that has a particular aesthetic, and you have a specific interest, the kind of niches I was describing earlier in our talk today, I think you were talking about a fairly, sizable design fee, in the order somewhere between 5 to 10% of construction costs, right? So you're talking about, a number that could be, easily, you're talking about a 5-digit number, right? So,
right.
So to position a cost of a house plan can still be a tremendous value compared to custom design. Can fall somewhere in that range between a couple of $1,000s and, 5 digits. We're talking $10,000 and up. So currently I'm selling my plans for $4,750. And I find customers have no qualms about that. I cannot say that I think I've had one inquiry where they attempted to negotiate a lower price for me, which I, simply didn't entertain. But I think people understand, when what they're getting, as a value, and they have no qualms and see that as a reasonable cost.
Well, it seems like one of the key takeaways I have from what you've done, Greg, is that this is obviously an alternative path to what most architects think of as practice, and it seems like it has made you think about this a lot more like a business than many design studios go out and when they first start think about, because you've got products, you've got all these different kind of options, you've got plans to create. It seems like you kind of know what you have to do every day, where maybe a traditional architect doesn't have anything to do if they don't have a client. You mostly don't have clients, right? You're mostly creating this stuff and then you're selling this stuff on the side. So maybe you could just speak a little bit about how much of a business this really has been to you and how you treat it.
Yeah, well, when it was at its height, it was probably, got up to about, 40% of my, my overall, gross fee generated in my practice. So, it never became bigger than my custom practice, but it certainly, when it was at that level, it certainly had my attention. Because that was I think that 40% was coming with a lot less effort than the 40% of the other 60%. Does that makes any sense?
Yeah, right.
So potentially it was a lot more profitable. Now I turned that profit back into expanding, the venture and, creating more product and spending more time on, blogging and marketing it. But those were all, investments in growing it. So, I don't know that I would ever want to concentrate solely on the house plans, but, I do think that it as a business model, it gives you other opportunities that are not possible with a conventional practice. For instance, if we ever decided to relocate, this is a part of my business that I can take wherever I decide I want to live. Whereas to move would be to sort of flush all of my momentum on my conventional practice down the toilet.
Right.
I think
That's
having
a great point.
Yeah, I think having that as a way to make your business portable is something that architects, we really don't get unless your practice becomes so big that you're servicing a region or can reach out and practice at a national level. You got to live in the region where you're working, or you don't really have any customers.
Yeah, that's awesome. Maybe we can wrap up, Greg, and you can just tell people where they can see more about you. You just give out kind of your Twitter handle, your website, the things that say the most, so people could look more into doing something like this.
Yeah, my website is lamidesign.com. It's LAMIDESIGN.com, and the house plan catalog is just a subdirectory of that, so it's lamidesign.com/plans. So all my sort of web presence lives under that lamidesign.com. So my regular practice is on that landing page is my regular practice. I own my office building, so I have a property management LLC that runs my office building. So I have that there as well. I have this crazy thing about building houses with shipping containers as well.
Nice.
So that's what you'll find at lamidesign.com. So the lower left is the house plans. That takes you into the catalog, which has its own landing page. You visit a house plan catalog, it's usually all about the search engine. How many bedrooms do you want? How many square feet? And then it sorts through the 10 or 20,000 house plans that they sell. So I don't have that search engine because I don't have that many house plans. And actually part of, the strategy here is forcing people to browse. And so the catalog for now, starts with this just series of thumbnails that gives you a peek at what the house looks like. And then different kinds of categories that allow you to sort the designs into situations that might be relevant to you. Houses in the suburbs, houses in the country. And then also sorted by their looks. The original collection, have the X-House collection. So I've sort of chronologically shifted the styling cues in the houses to build those groups. So that's. So the site's designed a little bit more for engagement rather than searching. So check out those links. And I've always tried to be very open and helpful to other architects that have had questions. When I set out to do this, there were a couple of architects that gave me a great coaching and great assistance. I'll tell you, one was Steve Muzan, who you might recognize his name. He's very much a leader in green design and green planning.
I know him.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. So he used to publish plans through Southern Living.
Yeah.
I'm sure he probably still has all his plans in those catalogs and still, making income from them. So he gave me a lot of great advice back then. And then there's a small house plan publisher, I think he's in South Carolina or North Carolina, Rick Thompson, who, doesn't sell through any of the big houseplant sites. He has his own site. So a little shout out to Rick. He was a great mentor, advisor to me when I, contacted him way back when and said, exactly how do you do this? And he has a great collection of designs, traditional smaller houses, really sort of aimed at small builders, developers. He also publishes quantity surveys, which are something builders like to get because it helps them with their takeoff. So he's always sort of directed his product line that way, check them out too.
Are you familiar with Allison Ramsey Architects?
No, don't know that name.
They check them out because they're from South Carolina and they do a lot of house planning as well. I met Steve Muzan through my work when I was down in Florida, and we were doing working with new urbanist communities and stuff like that, and became familiar with a lot of architects who offer house plans through their websites. Allison Ramsey being one of them, Steve Muzan and others. So there's that niche of the more traditional, and then there's the people like you who've got the niche of the more modern and stuff. But it's good to see architects out there kind of really pushing good design.
There are a lot of independents out there. They're harder to find because any search for house plans, the results are always dominated by the large vendors. But even the designers that sell through the large vendors have their own websites and sell direct. And when you're trying to figure this out, and this is what I did, is I spent a tremendous amount of time on these other sites, seeing how they organized and thinking about who I was trying to sell to and what to take away. So that there's a lot more to think about there, but there's always the opportunity to publish your plans through one of the larger sites. But of course, your plans are going into a sea of thousands of plans. So that's a hard place to be selling. I have one distributor that sells only some of my plans, not all of them. And that's houseplans.com. And I agreed to sell with them because they were taking a progressive approach to trying to establish they called it an exclusive collection. But what it came down to is that they were going to sell at least a group of their plans based on, leveraging the designers and letting the designers, express a brand rather than, most of the other plan sites. They don't want to do that. They don't want the designer to be part of the identity of the product. They just want all of the product, dropped into the mix and to suppress the individuality as much as possible. So I think houseplans.com was moving in a direction that I agreed with. I mean, I think a big part of the selling is the story that you attach to each house and what the design is about. And I think, that becomes an important part of attracting the customer is they want to know about the backstory. They want to know about, what this house is about. What was the designer thinking about? And the fact that, to sell in most of those large sites, all of that is simply ignored. I don't think that's a good thing for designers. It's a good thing for selling house plans because becomes more and more of a commodity. But I think, as architects that are thinking about what we're designing, we want that story to be part of the way you sell the house plans.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So the big challenge then for the independent is building traffic, and attracting people. And I'm not, the best guy to talk about strategies for, building traffic and attracting people to your site. I mean, some of that is content, some of that is, web magic, SEO, and all that other business. I can't really speak to that, but I've put a lot of time into writing and marketing and publishing on my website in order to build traffic. For the most part, it's it's always slowly increased.
Yeah, well, it's definitely an opportunity that, as we were mentioning earlier, that other architects could use, and more architects should be involved in. So I do like the idea of the whole passive income too. So as architects are looking for additional revenue sources, this is certainly a potential. And you and some of the others that you mentioned here are certainly showing the way of how it can be done, and how hopefully architects can become more involved in the process. So definitely appreciate you coming on to the show, Greg. We've talked about this for a while, and I'm finally glad we were able to make it happen.
Yeah, I'm thrilled. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Let's get everybody out there and shake up this industry.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Call to action. That's right.
Absolutely. So if you have questions or comments about this episode or anyone else, visit the website at archispeakpodcast.com, and you'll find links to our Twitter accounts where you can talk to all of us, and we'll have Greg's Twitter account in the show notes, and our link to our Facebook page if you want to engage with us there over this topic. And the episode I had mentioned earlier, in this particular episode that kind of started us off on all of this with the Handley Wood stuff, was episode 29, Plans Are Us. So definitely take a listen to that episode, either before or after this one, so you can kind of figure out what kind of launched us off into this one. And if you want to leave us an audio comment, please remember to call Archispeak at 415-484-8496. And also want to shout out to our sponsor, ARCAT. So please remember to visit them. We really appreciate their support of the show. They're at arcat.com. And if you haven't already done so, please remember to leave us a review on iTunes. We definitely appreciate those as well. So everyone, thanks for listening to this one. And thanks again to Greg being on the show. Appreciate it.
A pleasure.
And look for the Archispeak homes coming soon.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Only outlined my body in Tiffany blue. When I died, I drove right in and swam with the dolphins and Lisa Frank and you. My funeral was beautiful. Oh, we got it for days on end. Thank God I'm cut, 'cause of my kind of luck, I'll be up on the block in front of all of my friends. This is what you get. This is what you get. This is a schedule, this is a set. It's unpredictable lest you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know. This is what you get. This is a schedule, this is a set. It's unpredictable lest you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know. Top to the basement. Blow by blow, kinds of steel, very real, very rock, but it's still very rock body. Paper, scissors, sister, preach, deep, open the reach, backs and abs. Bike jumps what you get. This is a schedule, this is a set. It's so predictable, lest you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know,